Everyone, I am Shahab, and in this episode we want to talk about hosted services versus background services. What's the differences and how do they behave in .NET Framework? Stay with me and let's dig deeper into the topic. So what do we have in here is a normal ASP.NET application. It just has an endpoint with hello world, and I have created a couple of background services and hosted services. They're not doing that much. Like the main hosted service class in here, it is implementing the IHostedService. And when you are implementing this interface, you have usually to implement two methods, start async and stop async. What I am doing here is just trying to simulate an operation with task that delay, like something that takes 2 seconds, very short running task, and also then logging in some information about the hosted service, its name and the time that it is running. Let's add this hosted service to our application. So there are two steps in creating any background service or hosted services. One is the class that implementing the logic, and then we need to add them to the DI container through the iService collection. Let's do so in here. So here we could say builder.services, let's say .add hosted service, and it is main hosted service. And let's run our application now and see how it behaves. The application is running now, and what I want to point out is that you see the main hosted service is running here at this time, and then the application is listening to some addresses and ports, and here you could see that the application is started afterwards in here. This indicates that when we are registering a hosted service into our application at the startup, the application is waiting for all of the hosted services to finish the task they are running in their start async method, and then it starts the application ready to serve incoming requests. Let's add another hosted service to see that in action too. So let's see, I have like another hosted service. It's also not that much fancy. The same thing, it is also having some tasks that delay to simulate some operations and then logging some information in here for us. Let's go back to our program and add the other hosted service in here, add hosted service, another hosted service. Let's run the application. Okay, the application is running, and if you see here, we have the main hosted service, then the another hosted service, and afterwards the app is started in here. And if we switch the order that we have registered these services, the order that they will be executed will change. Let's switch the order in here, stopping the application. And if I run the app again, you will see that another hosted service will run first and the main hosted service will run second. And you immediately see that in action in here. If I scroll up, you will see that here we have another hosted service and then the main hosted service is running. Another way to run tasks in the background in .NET is to inheriting from the background service base class and implementing its execute async method. The background service base class itself is also a hosted service, but the way the framework treats these classes is different than the way it treats the hosted service classes. Let's take a look into that. I have a background service implemented in here. The first things that you might notice is instead of a short running task, I have a while loop, which I created this just to simulate a long running task. This is one of the big differences between hosted service and background service. You should use hosted services for short running tasks in the background, and then the background services for long running tasks. Also not doing that much fancy work in here, just doing some delays to simulate some operations, and then we are logging some information in here. So now let's remove those hosted services that we added and just add one background service just to compare the behavior of them within the framework. Let's go to our program class, comment out these two hosted services, and then just add our background service as my first background service as a hosted service in here. And let's run the application again. One of the differences now that you could notice is that the application is already started. And it didn't wait for the background service to start or finish what they have to do. And then afterwards, you see that the background service is running every 2 seconds in here, which is like the delay that we had, and it just keeps running. So at the startup time, the application is not waiting for the background services to finish what they are supposed to do, because they are meant for long-running processes, and we don't want to stay like for eternity for them to be finished. Some of them may last for the whole life cycle of our application from the beginning to the end and never stop or never finish what they're doing, right? Because of this while loop, they're repeating some tasks. Let's take a look into the implementation of the background service and see why this behavior is different from the hosted services. Okay, let's go to our My First Background Service and check the implementation of the background service in the framework. And here you see that we have a protected abstract execute async, which is when we are inheriting from this class we need to implement. And if we go to the start async, if you notice here, the background service is implementing IHostedService. So it also needs to implement the start async and stop async. This means it is not awaiting the execute async to finish what it is supposed to do. It is just doing fire and forget, and the thread is running the next instructions in the code. And that's one part of why at this startup, the application is already started while these background services are running in the background. We said that the background service is a special IHosted service. That means we are also registering them the same way we are registering hosted services. One important aspect when we are dealing with hosted services and background services is that the order we are registering them, it matters, right? We saw that earlier at the beginning of this video, right? So it does matter where I am registering this background service. If my first background service is depending on something that the main hosted service or the another hosted service in my example are doing, then it should be running after those are finished. If I change this order, let's take a look how it changes the behavior of the application. Now, if you see, we have our main hosted service running, then we have our background services running, and then another hosted service is running. And if in our implementation, so there is no guarantee when the background service is running, whether it's before the main hosted service, whether it's after the hosted service. When the application starts, it just goes through all of them, issues this start async method, and since the my first background service is not awaitable, then it immediately goes to the hosted service. And in our example, before the background service even gets the chance to run, the main hosted service is finished, but the another hosted service is not finished, right? And the main background service is running before that, and then that one. But notice that the application is still not started before all the hosted services are finished their job. And if I remove this and scroll, you see that my background service is still running in the background because it is a long-running process there. So the scenario that we ran into a problem was that we had a hosted service that was responsible for applying the EF core migrations to our new database. And then we have a background service that was reading from specific tables and doing some operations behind the scenes. The problem was when we run the application on a very new machine, we observed a weird behavior. Our background service started to read from the database and throwing exceptions that the tables does not exist. So we have issues. And sometimes the host or the application was stopped unexpectedly or terminated. Let me describe it a little bit. After .NET 6, the behavior of exception handling in the background service has changed. In the new implementation, if the background service throws an unhandled exception, it will stop the host. And that was what we were observing. Let's take a look into that. Let me add an exception throwing background service. It implements the execute async, have some tasks that delay in here, just 5 seconds just to make sure that some of the hosted services or the background services are already running. And then in a while loop, it just throws an exception. Let's add that hosted service to our pipeline. Let's just add it at the first one. I'm just moving this background service to the end. And let's, I'm not sure if our app is running. And let's run our application again. Now you see the main hosted service is started, another hosted service is started, the application is started, right? And then the method or operation is not implemented, like the exception thrown. And you see the app stopped working. To prove that, I could send a request here to app, and you see the connection refused because the app is not running. We could change this behavior through host options. So here we could go to builder.host and then configure host options. What we need to set is the property background service exception behavior. It has two options, the stop host, which is the default behavior, and the ignore. And we could set it to ignore, and now if we run our application again, it will not stop if the background service throws an unhandled exception. So you see the main hosted service is running another hosted service, the application is started. After a while, there is an exception happening in the background service, but it's not preventing my application from starting. My first background service is still running in the background, but the throwing exception one is stopped working. But that didn't lead for the whole application to stop. If you want more deep dive knowledge about how hosted services and background services are designed behind the scene, I'm adding the links down below, and also there is a video from my friend Saeed that is describing them. You could also find the link to that video as well. In this video, we take a look into hosted services and background services and which of them is better suited for what kind of operation. If you have a short running tasks that needs to be done before the application is started and being ready to serve the incoming request, you should use the hosted service. If you want some long running processes running in the background of your application, use the background services. The host awaits all the hosted services to be done with their tasks at the startup of the application, but it does not await the background services. By default, if a background service throws an exception, it will stop the host at any point in time. If you want to change that behavior, you need to configure host options and set the background service exception behavior to ignore. And last but not least, the order in which you are registering hosted services and background services matters. The framework runs them in order that you have registered them, and if they have dependencies on each other, make sure that you are not surprised at runtime. I hope you enjoyed this session. Do not forget to like and subscribe, share your thoughts and ideas in the comment section. What do you think about hosted services and background services? And at the end, enjoy coding and damet hünger.